Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome our panelists and our guests in the audience. Let me introduce myself. I'm Patrick Fitzgerald, the Marketing Director for SMLR Group. And the SMLR member of the panel is Mr. Roy Hogsett, our Executive VP of Sales. And this morning we have James Collard and Mark Pribish, both of Merchants Information Solutions, joining us and answer questions and to tell us quite a bit, I hope, about their company and what exactly is what the services they provide and why they do it. And unfortunately, Alan Heyman is not able to join us this morning, but I'm sure he will be back next time. And with that, also, if you have a question, for anybody in the audience has a question, please go to your chat box or chat window and use that to ask the question. Ask me the question, and I will get it to our panel. I'll ask it for you. If you would prefer to ask a question yourself verbally, then please simply let me know through the chat, again to the chat window, and I will unmute you and allow you to ask your question. To answer your question ahead of time, why is everybody muted except for the panel? Well, imagine yourself in a very crowded room with everybody talking at once, and that's why we mute everybody that comes in. So, now that the paperwork is out of the way, I would like to introduce again Roy Hogsett, the SMLR Executive VP of Sales, and he will be working as our moderator today. Roy, it's all yours.
Thank you, Patrick. Everybody meet Patrick. He is our Chief Marketing Officer and the gentleman that keeps us on the straight and narrow as best he can. We've got some pretty wide side trails we've taken now and then, so it is my pleasure this morning to have a rare treat for everybody. I'm going to start with Mark, and Mark has probably spent many years doing lectures and presentations and speaking engagements around the country. And he has a special quality. He's going to talk to you about cybersecurity insurance in generic terms, things you need to know, stuff people have been afraid to ask. And we're going to let him start this show. And this is where you will probably generate a lot of your questions from. So with nothing more than just saying it is with an absolute pleasure that I introduce Mark Pribish. Mark, it's all yours, sir.
Thank you, Roy. So my world is 27 years of insurance and risk. I am not a technology expert. I'm not a legal expert. And in talking about the cybersecurity threat landscape, what I do is talk about the reality of data breach, the reality of identity theft, the reality of the threat landscape. That allows businesses to benchmark what they have to do to be proactive, and also to benchmark what they have to do to respond in the event they have a data breach event. So I basically have 7 or 8 bullet points I'd like to share that reflects this reality. The number one thing is no one business, organization, or government can prevent itself from ever experiencing a data breach event. And as a point of reference, the top 10 banks in the U.S., the top 10 insurance companies in the U.S., and the 3 credit bureaus in the U.S., they all have more financial and IT resources than any other business sector, and yet they all have been breached hundreds of times in the last 10 years. So if the banks and the insurance companies and the credit bureaus can't prevent it from happening, what leads you to believe you can prevent it from happening? The second thing, the second thing is IT security experts today are developing new breach prevention technology, protocols, best practices every day. And yet hackers and ID theft criminals and organized crime and corporate spies continue to breach confidential data breaches every day. So databases every day. So here's point number one. There is a disconnect based on how much money businesses are spending on information security technology, which, by the way, $77 billion last year, according to Gartner Research, one of the largest IT research firms in the world. they determined that businesses worldwide spent $77 billion on information security technology to prevent breaches from taking place. Well, those same businesses, according to Gartner, or according to Grant Thornton, fifth largest accounting firm in the world, those same businesses spent $315 billion after the fact. So there's a disconnect. We're spending $77 billion to prevent it from happening, but those same businesses worldwide are spending $315 billion after they're happening. So that's the reality that we have to face. According to Trend Micro, one of the largest software security firms in the world, they tracked every data breach event, and this is another big reality point. Trend Micro tracked every data breach event since 2005, at least the ones we know of, and in tracking every breach event, they determined that only 25% of all the breaches since 2005 in the U.S. were related to IT and hacking. IT and hacking, it's the sizzle that makes the headlines, but what Trend Micro learned, and they are a technology company, so it's to their interest to say most breaches are technology related. Instead, their September report, and if anyone wants the September 2015 report from Trend Micro, which is titled The Myths about Data Breach Events, they determined that 75% of every data breach event has nothing to do with IT and hacking, but has everything to do with people, current and former employees, customers, vendors, contractors, along with social engineering and organized crime. And that half of that was, while half of that was malicious intent, the other half, accidental release. So in looking at this reality, it's not all about IT and technology, it's more about employee education and awareness and helping our companies, our organizations, our employees understand clearly their responsibility in paying attention and understanding information security and governance. Now, just a couple more bullet points on the reality of things. While information security technology is critical, by the way, I'm not minimizing technology. Without it, we're in trouble. But while it's critical to every business, an equal or more important component in managing information security and governance and managing data breach events is what I would call response and recovery. In fact, many times I say response and recovery is the future of data breach risk management. And here's my single largest point. Most CEOs and CIOs do not get fired because their companies are hacked or experience a data breach event. These CEOs and CIOs, and I'll use Target as an example, got fired because of their failed management response to a breach event. So whether you're a small to medium-sized company or a large company, it's not a question of whether or not you're going to experience a breach event. You will. The question is, will your management response to that breach event keep your customers, maintain your revenue? Will it grow your profits? And my last point of reality, according to the National Cybersecurity Alliance, which is a private-public law enforcement type organization, 83% of small to medium-sized businesses have no formal cybersecurity plan. That means if any one of our organizations experienced an event last night, and we're talking about it this morning on what are we going to do, it's already too late. So with that, I'll bring this back to Roy with those reality checkpoints.
Patrick, did we get any questions? I know it's early and I'm about to introduce Jim, and maybe it's better that Jim just dovetails straight into the specifics in a lot of areas. Patrick, Jim spent a half a day with me educating me in that whole area and a lot more on just the customers and what they're trying to do and the generalities. And again, we have an excellent speaker that does not have to go into product to do that. So we can go either way, Patrick. If you've got questions,
well,
you may want to bring.
I got one that came in, and I'm not sure if it's going to be answered along the way, but what it was says, what role does the C-suite play in breach mitigation? So, I mean, if you guys want to deal with that later, or not deal with it, but English. Tackle it now or tackle it later. It's entirely up to you.
And this is Mark. I'm happy to jump right in. So the C-suite is huge and critical to the future of data breach risk management. Right now, it's all been about the organization only. Recently, based on actual court cases, directors and officers are now being a part of lawsuits. So when you take a look at the legal and financial liability of a breach event, regardless of the size of your organization, it's no longer just the organization itself, but it's the directors and officers who now have a shared responsibility in how a company or an organization manages its cyber exposures, how it manages its cyber breach events. And when we talk about data breach, it's not just a cyber or technology event. It's any type of breach event. But directors and officers are now, in the court of law, being brought in to many of the lawsuits that are taking place across the U.S. So they have to take an active role in supporting the leadership of every organization that they're a director or officer of.
Cool. Okay.
All right.
I'm going to.
Patrick, I have a couple of more that came through from some of the other people that you don't even have on because they're coming from me.
Okay.
But I don't know, Jim. Here's one that I think Jim will move right into your area anyway. One of the biggest questions is how do we know what to do when we have constant exposure? And he went into some expletives beyond that, like 4 times a day, even in my sleep. But how does somebody really know, with the constant exposure, with the analysts, with the blogs, with all the big kids on the block, the top 4 in that, are hitting every day, this is him now, his company, and I'm sure a lot of others along the way, you got to do this and it needs to be done with that. You got to do this and it needs to be done with us. So how would you answer that, Jim?
Roy, that's a very good question, and it kind of gets to the heart of this. Cybersecurity, which is generally what we're speaking about here, is while Mark paints a pretty dark picture, which is accurate, by the way, and let me speak back to the first question we talked about very briefly. At Merchants Information Solutions, the very first agenda item at every board meeting is compliance and cybersecurity. So it isn't just the C-suite. Myself as an officer of the company, it's our board of directors. So it is top down. And it has to be owned by the senior leadership or it just doesn't work. But preparing for cybersecurity or having a proper defense is, as Mark has said, more than just your technical defenses. You have a great perimeter defense. You trust your managed service provider, and they're good at what they do, but they cannot protect you from all threats. It's just impossible, especially from your internal threats. The simple, unintentional damage caused when an employee clicks on a link in an email that then loads up a virus into the system. So it is like a sport. It's football. It's basic blocking and tackling. The company has to prepare. They have to have a policy. They have to think through their response and have identified the right people who need to be involved in that response. They need to have a basic incident response plan. And then they need to test that. None of these efforts are particularly difficult to do at all. In fact, we try to, part of our mission at Merchants is to provide resources to small business owners, particularly because we understand that they won't have those resources or may not know where to find those resources. Or the challenge may seem overwhelming, when in reality it is. Some good basic preparation will go a long way towards protecting your business when that event finally happens. We speak of data breach just like we speak of ID theft. It's not if but when, and that is clearly demonstrated in the news and perhaps in your own experience. So You can have the very best managed services. You can have well-trained people, and it can still happen to you. And for what it's worth, we know from various studies that have been performed, conducted, that the majority of small businesses fail as a result of a data breach. It's pretty obvious to us that small businesses are not reporting all of their data breaches. I suspect that the numbers that are published in the press and in these various studies are woefully understated, because those primarily, or they only reference the data breaches that are known. Most small business owners may just work through it, ignore it, or may not even be aware of the breach, which is more common than you might think. And
so Jim, if I can jump in here,
go ahead, Mark.
The Ponemon Institute in 2015, in their annual 2015 State of Endpoint Security Report, they basically said that what they try to do is identify trends and changes in endpoint risk management. And while all of us know that endpoints can include servers and desktops and laptops and smartphones, even printers, the report basically had a big conclusion that the biggest problem is the negligent or careless employee with multiple mobile devices using commercial cloud apps and working outside the office. So it's really interesting. We have the physical plant of our home office, we have the branch office, but then we have people working remotely. And it's the employee who's either careless, negligent, incompetent. They are a huge gap in information security. And then just 1 month ago, SailPoint, in their annual Identity and Access Management Study, they came out, and by the way, any point of reference that we reference, if there's a request for these documents, research documents, surveys, supporting documents, we're happy to send them. So this April 2016 SailPoint study said that 25% of employees will share sensitive information outside the company, and they said that 1 in 5 employees would sell their passwords to an outsider, and they said that 65% of respondents admitted to using a single password among multiple applications. So password management is a critical component to how we should be educating our employees. And 1/3 of employees are sharing their passwords with other employees. So when Jim talks about how each department, each division of all our companies, whether small or large, employees are a huge gap in information security and governance.
Mark, it's Roy. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I could say me and save this person from being recognized, but somebody's questioning the validity of those statistics, and I know where they're coming from. Everybody can make up a statistic, and if they stop right at the end of what it is, nobody knows where it comes from. Those sound really, really high for selling passwords and giving them out by employees. I think the emphasis from the question went, are we just shifting it all to the people, and therefore management and the corporations, software packages and technology are innocent? Really, they're doing their job. It's the employees that are making a mess of cybersecurity and security.
Actually, it's the complete opposite. It's a holistic. So when you have technology companies just selling technology and saying, we can prevent it from happening, that's not the answer. When we have companies like SailPoint, who are on identity and access management, they're a technology company, but they're saying, look, a big issue are employees. That's not just it. It's a holistic point of view. It's technology. Let's look at the reality again of a data breach. It's not just a technology event. It's not just an IT event. It's an HR event because it's dealing with current and former employee information and current and former employees. It's a vendor due diligence event because it's not just an employee event. It's the contractors and vendors that your company is utilizing, your payroll company, your healthcare company. Think of every small to medium-sized business that makes itself run and all the relationships it has. It's a physical plant event. I already referenced it's not just a home office or branch event. It's a remote employee event. It's a risk management event. So you have to look at the holistic view of information security and governance. And the reason I'm highlighting employees and people is because of the Trend Micro. So Privacy Rights Clearinghouse, a nonprofit organization based in San Diego, has tracked every data breach event in the U.S. since 2005. Trend Micro, last September, published a report. They are a technology company, and they reviewed every one of those breach events tracked by Privacy Rights Clearinghouse. They are a technology company. It would be in their best interest to say most of these breach events are a technology event. Instead, their report was debunking the myths of data breach. And they just said, look, based on the actual breaches, over 4,300 breach events in the last 10 years, based on the actual breaches, only 25% are IT and hacking. These 75% are people. By the way, on that 75%, there may have been an IT-related component, like a lost or stolen flash drive or laptop or smart device. But definitely, we're not trying to give the impression it's just one thing or the other. It's a holistic point of view. It is a technology thing. It's a people thing. It's a physical plant thing. It's a risk management thing. It's a HR event. It's a marketing and sales event, all the current and former customer information. So it's a holistic point of view that we have to look at.
Got it. Thank you, sir, very much. So,
Roy, speaking to that, I did a risk assessment with someone who was a partner of ours who's a cybersecurity partner, and we went to a medical office, actually a optometrist's office, to do a risk assessment. And it was interesting that the receptionist allowed us to go down this long hallway, past her station, go down a long hallway, and wander through the offices. We got into the back of the offices, and there was a larger room with perhaps 10 computer workstations. And there was a woman in there entering data onto a screen, sensitive client or patient data. And she smiled at us and asked us how our day was. It was very pleasant. And then she turned her back on us and continued to enter data in clear view of us. So two strangers who'd never been introduced to her were allowed to sit and watch what happened. Now, when we spoke to the owner of the business, they explained how they had very competent managed service providers, password protocols, and patch management, and good perimeter. They even did some intrusion testing, which is unusual for a business that size. But at the end of the day, all of that failed because of poor training of their staff. That would be a type of incident that Mark had referenced. It oftentimes goes back to the people. I manage the operations for my company. I leave it to my security experts to provide the perimeter and technical protection. It's my job to make sure that my people are not a point of risk for us, especially considering the very sensitive data that we manage on a daily basis.
Okay, Jim, do you have anything to follow up from where Mark was, or should we just continue with, because I have an interesting thing here, and I'm going to admit this is my question. I have had several, probably many, but several discussions with board of directors in the whole area of cybersecurity, and I think Mark mentioned in his intro, that level has to be more predominant. It has to be more sensitive to it. In the majority of those where I've had a reasonable discussion, the board member always had either their CTO or their CIO in the room, and the analysis at the end was, this is the gentleman or the lady that takes care of that. How do you handle that? Because it shifted back into technology. I know Mark's talking about holistic and that, but most of the board member suite people pass it right back into technology of either the CTO or the CIO.
Well, and that's understandable. they're the experts at certain things. But to Mark's point, this is the evolving scenario, or the evolving situation is clearly shifting from that. Oh, it's our CTO's problem. He's the guy that protects us. To that more of a C-suite board level oversight, because we likewise have a CTO, a very confident guy. He's really good. He protects our perimeter and our systems and our networks, but he can't manage my people, the threat that my people might create by clicking on the wrong material or leaving documents in clear view when they shouldn't, or allowing strangers into secure areas of our facility. So while I understand that, and that's common, increasingly it is becoming more holistic, and it needs to become that way. Okay, Bob is our expert, but I provide oversight. I'm speaking from the position of that CEO. I provide oversight and make sure that the whole, in the whole, our program is effective. And I think that's the only approach. And that's consistent with what Mark has been saying, I believe.
And if I can add to that, Jim, so something interesting has happened along the way, and Jim used the word evolve. So 10 years ago, by the way, our company is a 104-year-old company. We used to be one of the largest regional credit bureaus in the U.S., and we sold that asset to Experian 13 years ago. And 11 years ago, we reinvented ourselves to where half of what we do is both consumer and small business ID theft and data breach risk management solutions. And the other half of what we do is pre-employment screening, background screening. Jim Collard and I have been with our company 11 years. And 10 years ago, something was happening across America. Before 10 years ago, the IT guy was in charge of all information security at the largest Fortune 500 companies. But 10 years ago, something interesting happened. It was no longer the IT guy. It was an information security and governance committee. Now, half the time, it's led by the IT guy. The other half the time, it's led by the chief privacy officer or the risk manager or the VP of operations. And so the Information Security and Governance Committee in our company, which is 10 years old, has representation from all department heads. Now, it just so happens it's led by our IT guy, our Chief Information Officer. But Information Security and Governance Committees are the future of data breach risk management. They have been around for 10 years, and they are leading the charge because the IT guy knows IT. But he or she is not an expert in all the other departments where all this other information resides and all the other employees are being managed. So it's a holistic information security and governance committee.
Okay, I have a question. I have a question that just came in. It says, I'm hearing an awful lot about government fining and penalizing companies for breaches. How do we avoid fines on top of the costs of a breach?
That's a great question. So here's a trick question for everyone on the call. Whether you're small to medium-sized business or large business, conducts business in just the state you're based or in all the states in which you conduct business, here's my question. Are you very familiar with the state breach notification law? I'll use Arizona as an example where we're domiciled. We're a 50-person company with 4,000 business clients across the United States. We are very familiar with the Arizona state breach notification law, and we're very familiar with the state breach notification laws in which we do business. But it gets bigger than that because there's 47 state breach notification laws and Guam, Washington, D.C., Guam, Puerto Rico, 4 U.S. territories. And there's federal laws, the FTC red flag rule, the HIPAA high-tech rule, that are specific to, are you a creditor? Do you have accounts? Do you manage accounts? Are you in the healthcare business? Your business should be very familiar with the state and federal laws in which you are either physically located and or the business sectors in which you conduct your business. Are you receiving information? Are you storing information? Are you transferring information? Where is it being received, stored, and transferred? You know, we haven't talked about ransomware yet, which we will, but to mitigate no one company can ever prevent itself from experiencing a data breach event. So what's the answer? You should have a policy. Your policy, you should have an information security and governance policy. That policy should be in writing, and every employee should review that policy and sign it, saying, I've read and understand our ABC company's information security and governance policy. Just by having a policy in writing and having every employee read it, that policy includes the company being aware of the state and federal breach notification laws. That mitigates your exposure to when you experience a breach event.
Hey, Roy, I'd like to add to Mark's comments there because he's spot on. The reality is it may be almost impossible for everybody on the Information Security Committee, for example, to understand all of those 46 state breach notification laws. It may be impractical for everybody to be that well versed in the various compliance issues that they may face. So what you have to do is be prepared to partner with the appropriate people who can bring that expertise into play when you need it. You really need to, it's like having tools in your toolbox. You may not, I can't turn that big nut on that bolt with my hands, so I reach into my toolbox and pull out an appropriate wrench. Well, having a partner who can help you work through the realities of a data breach in a post-event circumstance as part of your breach response or event response plan, then that makes you effective, and that gets the job done in an appropriate fashion. So I agree with everything Mark says. Just we can't always have that expertise and knowledge in-house. Large companies have retained counsel, in other words, their own attorneys who may be specialists in certain areas of law that the business commonly deals in. But a small and medium-sized business can't afford to do that. So they need to know who, what kind, where to contact that kind of attorney. They need to establish a relationship with that attorney. It won't cost them anything. They need to know who they are and how to reach them, and they need to have that individual aware of their response plan so that person can stand in and provide those services when that eventuality comes to pass.
Well, I have another question, but I think you might have answered it with that last comment. It says you've talked an awful lot about big companies. How does any of this apply to my small company? I don't have a CIO or CISO or even a board of directors.
So as a small company, you are, as the owner and CEO and founder, you're also the head of sales, head of marketing, head of HR, risk management. Having a policy, in the simplest of terms, having a one-page policy in writing, in the most basic of terms, we lock our doors, we lock our files, we have software security, we update our software security regularly. When you put something in writing and put it in a file, and then you experience a breach event, if and when you ever have any type of liability, like a lawsuit, you get to pull that piece of paper out and say, our company thought about this. Our company planned for this. Our company put it in writing. If you're a one-person company, a five-person company, a 10-person company, the fact that you shared this one-page policy in writing with all employees and educated them that we need to take responsibility in protecting our customer or employee information, that's huge in helping mitigate your risk.
That's a great answer. Roy, do you have anything else? Any other questions?
Yes, I do, sir. No, I've got one. I know that Mark and Jim have both been talking about small to medium to the upper end of the SMB market, and everybody knows that by now, surely that's small, medium business. But they do get up large in scale. I have another question, and I do not believe it's been addressed, but I feel both Mark and Jim should have an opportunity to speak on it. I'll tell you where the question came from, and it'll probably shock a lot of the other people on the end of this line. A former person I used to work with called me and said, I understand you've moved over into the cybersecurity space. We are about to conduct a very thorough, large review because we feel that one of the areas that we are negligent in, and this is a large retailer, not a small SMB, is in the area of third-party vendor relationships. I've not heard out of all of the people, out of our negligence, out of our selling and doing all of that, let's go down to a small 20, 30-person company in that. What's being done to protect that kind of a company? And all of them have third-party relationships. If you've got a server farm, if you've got data storage, if you've got cloud, if you've got payroll, what is being done to protect the small user in the third-party vendor relationship space?
So when you take a look at vendor due diligence, I was at the RIMS, Risk Insurance Management Society annual conference, about 14,000 people a month ago in San Diego, and the risk manager of FireEye, one of the largest security firms out there today, they work with all the Fortune 500 companies. She said their number one priority action for all their clients is vendor due diligence. Target and Home Depot were two breach events a year and a half, 2 years ago, and both of those were through third-party vendors. One was a heating and air conditioning contractor in Western Pennsylvania where an employee clicked on a phishing email and the credentials to the Target server were stolen from that employee clicking on a phishing email. Home Depot was a third-party contractor that a former employee, it's still not determined whether it was accidental or malicious, but a former employee took credentials. So when you think of vendor due diligence, every person, in one-person company, a 10-person company, a large company, you should have a checklist. Your checklist should be how many years have they been in business? Any vendor you work with, how many years have they been in business? What are their information security and governance best practices? Do they have cyber liability insurance? And we can give, you can search engine templates on this, but vendor due diligence by asking questions and having it again in writing. So when someone comes to you and says, you're the reason I'm a victim of ID theft, or you're a reason why my company experienced a data breach event because your payroll company, your vendor, your cloud provider, they didn't know, they weren't prepared, et cetera, et cetera. By having that vendor due diligence checklist as a part of your information security and governance best practices, as a part of your policy and writing, that mitigates your exposure.
Excellent. Yeah, it was an interesting
Roy,
discussion
to Mark's point in your question, this is not just a big business. I mean, he mentioned Target and other large businesses, but the same principle applies. It scales down somewhat. And the one thing I would add is in your contract with your vendors, you want to make very certain that there's that you have appropriate contract terms that mitigate risk and ensure that they're going to stand good for the damage that they may cause you in terms of hold harmless clauses and that sort of thing.
Something. This is Patrick. Something that just occurred to me. You have a lot of small companies can't afford their own servers, their own IT departments. So what they'll do is they'll actually go out and use cloud services or a service provider. And then when questioned about vendor due diligence, they say, oh, we don't really use any vendors because everything's cloud-based. Well,
the cloud-based.
The very definition of the cloud is vendor services.
Yes.
And so a couple of events we've seen in the past few months were a service provider was breached, and a lot of small companies lost their sites and their files. Now, I guess it's more of a stream of consciousness than anything, but how would we address that, or how would you address that kind of an event as a small business owner, and all of a sudden you've discovered that your service provider or your cloud provider has been breached?
It's happened already to many cloud providers, but what makes the headlines is the individual organization that was affected by the breach. The big answer, and I'm going to relate this to ransomware, is first of all, the vendor due diligence of that cloud provider. They, as a selling point, the cloud business has become a very, very big business, and a big part of differentiating one cloud provider from another is security. So when they sell their cloud services, they're also presenting, here's not just what we do for you, here's how we protect our company, our cloud service from experiencing a breach event. And they say, and if they're good, they say, and if it were to happen, here's what we have in place to support you. And here includes our cyber liability insurance to protect us and you. So the cloud service provider has its own vendor checklist to tell you how safe and secure they are so that you and your customers will be safe and secure.
Here's some interesting examples of vendors that we don't think about as creating risk for us. But our company, at least, has voice over IP. Our phone system is server-based. We have lots of hardware sitting around, and when I pick up the phone, it looks like everybody else's phone. But the reality is, it's a server. It's a program that runs on a server, and that server's virtualized, meaning it runs with other programs in a portion of a physical server, and our provider has access to that software. He has access through our firewall to manage it. Well, that's a point of risk for us. We have copy machines in our business. We need them, obviously. Those copy machines have hard drives. And the copy machine people come in and work on our machines when they need adjustment or repair, and they have access to those hard drives. Who vets that? And then, of course, the one that goes completely under everybody's radar, and that's these really good people who come in after hours and clean your building. They wander around in all of your facilities with complete freedom. Who did a background check on them? Are they somebody you'd invite to your home? I mean, because that's the risk you create. They're in there and they've got full access to your system. Now, maybe you've got great perimeter protection, but they can wander into files. They can look at that credit card number that was written down by one of your people as they were processing an order. Those are all points of risk that are part of your vendor program that you need to consider.
Jim, I'm trying to formulate this question, and either one of you can handle it. I'm going to try to condense it down and not lose its value. Why is it everyone talks about we have to have either qualified outside attorneys, major insurance programs, and yet what comes back to me internally within my company is this specific policy has always been under estimated. It's always been not understood by employees. How can I get something that addresses the policy and making sure in compliance with it without having to buy, and this is now I'm going to transition from his question. I don't want to buy the whole car. I know I've got a bad carburetor and I just need to do something about it. How do we shift it back to policies that are deficient with compliance without having to buy the monster?
I'm going to go back to employee. Go ahead, Jim.
Oh, that's all right. I think what you're asking me is, do you need to pay for that $500 an hour attorney in order to draft these kinds of documents? Is that the gist of that question?
No, I think they've paid that, but now what they're doing internally, they're able to see that it is still deficient too often. How can we address that again without having to buy the multi-million-dollar package? They don't need that yet. They would like to get this solved and then go on down the road looking at the bigger opportunities, but they can't afford. They haven't put a budget together for it. It's not something that they're aware of, but this has been brought to their attention several times, and it's still not being addressed. How can they address just that area and then move to the overall picture?
Mark?
I think what it really comes down to is an assessment. So let's talk about, we're on this call about cybersecurity risks. And what are those cybersecurity risks? Well, there's reputational risk, brand equity. There's operational risk. There's financial risk. There's litigation and regulatory exposures we talked about. Your business, small or large, has assets. So I guess you have to prioritize your cyber security risks specific to your brand equity, your assets, your operations, potential litigation and regulatory exposures, and the financial side. And then when you assess that, whether it's let's talk about cyber insurance. Cyber insurance started 18 years ago. And the 10 largest property and I was with AIG 9 years. I left AIG 13 years ago. And I was one of the first people in the world to sell or cross-sell cyber insurance to one of the largest banks in the U.S. So cyber insurance is one component to your business in minimizing the compliance side, the regulatory side. And by the way, this is just a footnote. Cyber insurance started 18 years ago in the U.S. AIG created that product. 10 years into it, 8 years ago, the 10 largest insurance companies selling cyber had a combined $100 million in sales. 10 years into it. And they were saying, is anyone going to buy this product? 5 years later, it was a $1 billion product. Then $2 billion, then $2.5 billion. It's projected to be a $25 billion product within the next 5 to 7 years. So cyber insurance is one tool, one risk management tool to support minimizing your risks. When I think of, I am so focused on employee education and awareness right now. On the compliance side, almost every business has some type of once a year employee education. I think it should be regular and frequent, whether it's quarterly or monthly. And that employee education could be something as simple as an email update on recent trends and happenings and updates to the latest and greatest laws specific to your business. But I think employee education, frequent and regular, monthly or quarterly, has to take place more than a once-a-year event. I think cyber insurance can be a component that minimizes your risk depending upon the priority of your brand equity, your assets, your financial, your legal liabilities, all those things.
Roy, now that Mark has said all that, I'll give you the short answer. And I think the real question, in order to be effective about this whole cybersecurity thing, the starting point, and Mark already suggested that, is some sort of an assessment to understand, because most small business owners find it difficult to really understand their points of risk. They what information are they really capturing? They may not be aware of all the stuff they're capturing. Do they want to process credit cards in-house, or do they want to have a trusted vendor do that for them? So someone who can conduct an effective risk assessment about their operations, help them understand their points of risk and the severity, and then prioritize that. And that would include insurance coverage, physical plant, the sorts of services that they're utilizing from their managed service provider, their training, all of those things are part of that risk assessment, and that's an excellent beginning point. That's money well spent. And then you can build your budget around, and management can make an intelligent decision about the policies and procedures that they want to put in place that are feasible for their business economically and otherwise, in order to provide the protection that they think they need.
Thank you both very much. Thank you. I think you've done. I'm all done here, Patrick. Are there any more questions coming from your side?
Well, let's see here. I've got one kind of a comment. It came across that so employee training is just as important as IT and cybersecurity.
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
I'd like to go ahead, Jim.
I was just going to say we want to be careful that we don't. I agree with Mark that employee training, that whole human element, is understated. I think there's several tools out on the web that offer you. There's 4 or 5 companies that offer you free phishing tools where you can send phishing emails to your own people, and it's free. You don't have to spend money on it. They're obviously have reduced functionality, but they do work. You've got 25 people. Send an email. All you have to do is load up those email accounts into this free service. Choose which phishing template you want to use. Citibank or whatever, and maybe choose the one that's the same company that handles your 401k, so they recognize the brand. Send it out and see who clicks on the wrong stuff. And you're going to see typically a 20% or greater click-through rate, which means they failed. That'll tell you something. And you don't have to spend any money on to do it. It'll take you about 30 minutes to make it happen, and then you get to watch the results, and then you can sit down and talk to your people about that. That's a simple thing to do, not difficult. Mark, and if you contact us, we can provide you with those companies that do that for free, and you can have some fun. Anyway, that's a useful tool for you. But it's really about legs of a stool. You need good technical protection. That managed service provider, you need those smart people working for you, either on staff or through a trusted vendor to protect your physical assets. You need good insurance. You need somebody, you want to make sure that you've got the proper coverage to protect you when it happens. And then you need somebody to help you through the event and help actually solve the problem. So that's 3 legs to a stool. And part of that solving the problem has to be the training and the other things that go along with it.
I would like to share something. I know we're coming to a close. I would like to share something on ransomware. So I'm a member of InfraGard. InfraGard is a public-private alliance with the FBI. It's an FBI-run organization. And I get notifications weekly on the latest and greatest trends. And for any of those companies that are participating on this call that do have a dedicated IT or chief information officer, typically InfraGard has got like 4,000 members across the U.S. 95% of them are the IT folks. Here's something to just be aware of, and this came out in April from the FBI. Ransomware, and I think everyone knows what it is, but it essentially disables digital networks. And what's interesting, and it happened all by accident, ransomware, it started a couple of years ago. In the old days, hackers hacked information, and then they took it to a middleman, like Hacker Forums or dark parts of the web to sell, barter, trade the information that was stolen. And a couple of years ago, by accident, one of those hackers didn't steal the information, he disabled the information. And once he disabled it, he goes, maybe I'll just contact the organization directly and say, I'm really not interested in stealing your information, but you don't have access to it because I've encrypted it. And if you got the smartest guy in the world, it'd probably take 7.5 years to unencrypt it. Or you can pay me $1,000. Isn't that interesting? So ransomware has evolved from hackers stealing information and selling it in the market through a middleman to where now the hackers are eliminating the middleman, and they're just going directly to servers with information. It may not even be valuable information to other people, but it's valuable to you because you don't have access to it. So the notification that I received from InfraGard in April was that in all of last year, 2015, organizations in the U.S. paid $25 million in ransomware. In the first quarter of this year, organizations have paid more than $210 million in ransomware. It's going to be $1 billion business this year. And while most small to medium-sized businesses do not think they are a target because they don't have all that customer information or they're not that important, something that evolved along the way was the Fortune 1000 companies locked down really hard with all these breaches, so small to medium-sized businesses became the low-hanging fruit. And you became the low-hanging fruit not because of the content or information that you had, it's because you were considered a weak link in access to another company, like the small vendor heating and air conditioning company that was breached through a phishing email to get credentials to Target. So just because you're a small to medium-sized business, do not think for a moment you're not a target and you're not important. You are a target, you are important, and while ransomware right now is going to larger companies, don't be surprised if in a year or two, small to medium-sized businesses are new targets also.
Okay. Lenny,
Sleep good tonight, everyone.
Exactly. Any last comments from our panel?
No, thank you for the time.
Mark, James, thank you very, very
I
much.
would say this,
Oh, sorry.
despite that dark picture, preparedness, preparation, having the policies, it's still blocking and tackling. That's basic stuff. Starts at the top. It has to infuse the entire organization. And when you set a policy in place, to Mark's point, that's one of your best defenses from some regulatory fine or penalty. But you have to actually do what the policy says. If it says you provide training, you got to do it. So blocking and tackling, do the basics, plan for the eventuality.
Okay then. Well, thank you all for joining us. I really appreciate it, and thank you, Mark and James, for providing such incredible insight and answering our questions. If anybody has any questions that they would like me to get to James Collard or Mark Pribish of Merchants Information Solutions, email it or text it to me, or go to the SMLR website and ask it in the form, registration form. And I guess until next time, thank you very much, and that is a wrap, as they say.
Thank you, Patrick, very much. Thanks, Mark and Jim. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.